Welcome back. Well, from wrestling to golf and Formula One, including soccer, Saudi Arabia has spent billions of dollars in recent years investing in a big way in sports franchises. Its stated aim is to help diversify its economy away from oil. But is it also using sport as a means of papering over massive human rights abuses? Stephen Cook is a senior fellow for Middle East and African Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. He's also the author of False Dawn, Protest, Democracy and Violence in the New Middle East. Thanks for being with us.
Great pleasure.
So clearly this is an agenda. We know it's part of sort of this broader vision of changing the economy there. Do you see it that that's all that it is, that these are a series of investments being made by a country that needs to diversify?
Well, that's part of it. I think we should take the Saudis at face value at that. But of course, as you mentioned in your lead-in, there are other incentives, and one of those is to either obscure or deflect from the criticism that Saudi Arabia receives for its human rights record, which is not very good. And so if people are invested in the idea of international soccer or Formula One, they're big fans, World Wrestling Federation fans, they may be less attuned to the human rights violations that are happening in Saudi Arabia because they remain committed to the sport that they love. And the same goes for investors. People who are investing along with the Saudis in these sports may be less likely to criticize or go to their elected officials and say, hey, I have a major investment in this sport with the Saudis. It'd be good for us and for you if you tamp down on your criticism. I don't actually see that happening. In fact, with the proposed merger between Live Golf and the PGA, there's been more criticism of Saudi Arabia. And in fact, the U.S. Senate is holding hearings investigating this possible merger, during which all kinds of human rights violations are being surfaced.
And that, of course, is one example where there's a fair amount of hypocrisy or perceived hypocrisy because the PGA was so vocal about human rights as being the central issue and then seemed to buckle. Are fans kind of equally, it sort of sounds like you're suggesting they are, that they're really just more concerned about the sport and enjoyment of it and therefore will let other issues take a back burner? They don't want to get political. They just want to watch their golf?
Well, among my friends who are dedicated golfers, I think it's split. I think there are some who just want to go out and play golf on the weekends and are happy to see golf thrive, and no matter who's behind it. And then there are others. And of course, I live in the Washington, D.C. area, so people are pretty attuned to what's going on in the world. There are others who are deeply offended by what the PGA has done and do not want essentially the Saudi Public Investment Fund to take over the PGA.
So when we think about how far this could go, we now have like major athletes, heroes in their sport, aligning themselves with the kingdom. Is there a public policy issue here? I mean, is there a larger issue we should concern ourselves with, or is this just really about an investment in different sports and increasing the value of it, and we can separate the two issues, I guess?
I'm not quite sure that there is a public policy issue here, other than the fact that there would be a monopoly over golf, for example, and the Saudis would be controlling this monopoly. And that's something that the Department of Justice in the United States and the Senate is looking into. You do see some of this effect, the kind of Saudi effect happening already when players on the Live Golf Tour have sort of dismissed criticisms of Saudi Arabia for its human rights record, saying that, the terrible murder of Jamal Khashoggi, a columnist for the Washington Post, happened many years ago. It's time to move on, those kinds of things. And that shows how people who are invested in and are being essentially paid by the Saudis, whether inadvertently or not, essentially help the Saudis in this effort.
So good to have you, Stephen. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Stephen Cook is a senior fellow for Middle East and Africa Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. Time for the takeaway, and when enough hot air causes a chill. Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith caused a stir when she said the province would put a hold on any new green energy projects there. The move has left just about everyone wondering about the motivation, but if that's not clear, it is clearly an unpopular one, managing to unite left and right in a way that is hard to do these days. Those concerned about progress on reducing emissions don't want to see any loss of momentum in Alberta's vibrant green energy sector. And those on the right don't particularly like government meddling in a free market like this, stirring up uncertainty and potentially sending investment elsewhere. Smith's stated rationale is that federal moratorium on new natural gas generation makes adding more green energy precarious. It's true that wind and solar are dependent on the elements, and a grid needs stable energy sources for the periods when the sun isn't shining or the wind blowing. But it's a hard logical loop that arrives at the conclusion that new green energy is therefore unwelcome. It raises the specter that rather than this being a matter of grid management, it's more a roundabout way to support traditional fossil fuel players, which find their profitability threatened by Alberta's growing green electricity providers. But whatever the reason, it couldn't really come at a worse time. In one of the hottest summers in recorded history, extreme weather wreaking havoc across the world and parts of the ocean hitting 100 degrees, dialing back efforts at greener energy doesn't just seem short-sighted, but dangerous. My takeaway? The world may be running out of time to solve our energy problem with greener solutions. Moving backwards could cost more than lost investments. That's Taking Stock for this week. I'm Amanda Lang. Thanks for being with us.